Happy President's Day, everybody. Trump 2025, man. Tariffs are in action, along with the entire world being scared of us, which is just freaking excellent. So let's start some bench racing. And I've got some excellent guests with us, but let's just hit the little intro just for a second because it took time to make. But here we go. I said only a second, and that's basically what we're going to do. But today's special guest is we've got Alex Martin. What's up, man? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
We're back. Good morning, guys. How are we?
So I interrupted him in his training. How you just got off the treadmill? How many miles did you do just now?
We did 8 this morning. Nice, easy 8, zone 2, just cruising. Actually, last week I kind of got sick, and then because I did the marathon 2 weekends ago now, and so last week was kind of a down week for me. And today I was just kind of breaking the rust off and getting going again. And it's actually 11 below outside, so I was on the treadmill happily.
Crazy. I want to ask some more questions about that, just for my own, my own reasonings. But here, we'll get the co-host in here. What's up, Coach?
Hey, good morning, guys.
Yeah, always the
Morning,
mad
Rob.
scientist here. So, Alex, you just did the marathon, and now you're just back running again. Do you have goals for like another one, or is this just recovery? I mean, no break.
Yeah, we have some pretty bold goals, I guess, in 2025. So when I retired, let's see, in 2022, I kind of set my goal was to run the LA Marathon. And I basically found like after about 2 or 3 months of being retired from full-time racing, it's something I had been at the elite level for 15 years, and I was like, what am I going to do with myself? And so I signed up for the marathon. And after LA, I did it in 2:59. And that kind of really was the catalyst for just like getting the running bug and like wanting to just keep doing marathons. I love the experience. I love the training, the preparation for LA. Um, and I was able to do a few more marathons. I think I knocked my PR down to like 250 in Mesa last year. And then this year I was like, hey, I had a whole list of marathons I wanted to do from Mesa, which was in February. I qualified for Boston for the first time. So I want to do Boston and then a bunch of local ones like Twin Cities, Madison. So I think in total, I think I'll be doing 5 or 6 marathons this year. So kind of a little bit of like maybe a bold goal, but I'm like, I don't know. I got the bug, and to be honest, like I'm training less now than I was when I raced full time. So, you know, yeah.
So, are you running like just an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, kind of a deal, depending upon how you break it up between your segments of whatever zone you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. Like as Rob would know, you're periodizing the year. So the Mesa block was about 12 weeks in total. And to be honest, like, so I would say my A goal for this year is Boston, which is in April. And so for Mesa, like, I really just wanted to get another marathon in the books. There was some things I was trying with my fueling. And even training, I implemented a little bit more strength training, which has always been kind of a pain for me. It's hard for me to implement strength training. I just love cardio, right? But so there was a few things I just wanted to try with this build. And so with Boston being the A goal, I didn't do a lot of intensity coming into Mesa. I really just did probably 10 weeks of like super easy zone 2, just putting volume in. I built my volume up to 80 miles a week. I think I did 3 or 4 70-mile weeks and then a couple 80-mile weeks. And then I just like basically 2 weeks before Mesa, I'm like, all right, we got to do a little bit of speed here to try and kind of get some leg turnover going, right? Rob knows what that's all about. And so I actually was able to do a 10K on the track the week before, and I set my PR in the 10K, like 36 flat. And so I was like, all right, like, the speed is there. It doesn't completely go away. And that kind of set me up good for Mesa. And I was able to knock 5 minutes off of Mesa, which was kind of a surprise. I didn't think I'd be that fit just because I haven't done a lot of intensity, but that kind of just shows, as you guys know, like that zone 2 is really important.
Yeah. So carryover, your zone 2, what is that for you? Is that 140 beats to 155 or just 150? And then what is the pace and miles usually for you running in zone 2?
Yeah, well, about 130 to 150, I guess, is my zone too. I mean, a lot of that, there's different factors like if you've ate before you run or how fatigued you are. There's a lot of things that can affect your heart rate, but for the most part, I would say I train by heart rate versus pace, like minute per mile. The only time I really start to pay attention to like minute per mile is like when I'm doing threshold type style. Like if I'm
Mm.
doing like, let's say 5 by 1 mile repeats, that I'm trying to go for like my marathon pace or half marathon pace. But for the most part, like my zone two stuff is just trying to keep it below 150 heart rate. Um, so yeah.
Okay. Okay. And Alex, how old are you and how much do you weigh? Just
We are but 35 years old, so we're in our mid 30s and 147 pounds, give or take,
and how tall are you? Just
5'4".
5'4"? Okay. So yeah, you're pretty stocky for being short,
Yeah, dude,
you
what
know?
you should see, like, it kind of almost makes me self-conscious. Like, I feel like I felt pretty lean coming into Mesa, and then I'm like running next to these people that are like emaciated runners, and I'm like, dude, I look like a freaking water buffalo out there. It's crazy. And like, dude, no matter how lean I get, I still look like a brick.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just don't think it's meant to be for me to look like a runner, but I'm still enjoying it either way.
Well, that's probably just because of all the 10,000 upon thousands of hours riding a dirt bike. You know, runners are very
Hmm.
specific as far as dinosaur arms and legs. And who
Yeah,
just broke? Was it Jacob like Kimball who just broke the half
Kip Limo,
marathon with
Yeah.
like 57 minutes or some shit?
Yeah.
And
56:42. I was watching a video on the treadmill this morning.
yeah, and then his 10K times in the middle of it was damn near world record pace too. After
Mhm.
5K, and his 5K times were like 13 minutes or something.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck, man? I don't understand how guys can move their legs that fast. And he did the whole half marathon at like a 4:19 pace, which
Mhm.
is nuts.
Insane. Yeah.
Totally insane. Okay, like little carryover Alex, because of how fit you have to be to race professional motorcycles, training into marathons, did you already have a pretty solid base where you felt like you could run 26 miles and you could do, under a 4-hour marathon pretty easy, or did it take time for you to build up to get under that 3 hours?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of fun. I started up the YouTube channel again this year, and I want to dive into that in my Mesa kind of recap video I have going on. But I'll give you guys a little precursor, I guess. So when I was racing moto, I probably was between 300 to 500 miles a year of running. So, as Rob knows, like you're doing a lot of cycling, skier, grower, running, and then obviously the most important thing is riding the dirt bike, right? And so when I retired, I bumped that mileage up, my yearly mileage up to 2,200 to 2,600 miles. So obviously, I was doing a lot more running. So having said that, like my fastest 5K I ever ran was in during COVID. When I was on JGR, I was like, all right, we don't know when we're going to race again. I told my trainer at the time, John Westing, I'm like, I'm going to go hammer. I'm going to try and set my 5K PR. And I was able to knock that down to like 17, 19. And so like I've always had pretty good leg speed. Like I did cross country in high school. I've always loved to run, but what's required for the marathon is like an extremely, robust aerobic base. And so, once I retired, it allowed me to like pretty much just focus on running. And so I was doing, obviously over the course of 2, 3 years, I was able to bump my mileage up to 70 to 80 miles a week, but it took a lot of time for me to just develop my body to get to that stage. And that's allowed me also with just building that mileage up to knock my marathon PR down from like 259, I think I said my first one was, to just most recently at 245. But I think it just goes, you have to, I just impress upon people that like it takes a lot of time and a lot of mileage to get to that stage, and obviously I think I've broken like 26 broken bones and I have three plates in my body and like 26 screws or something. So, I'm just fortunate to be able to run after a racing career.
Yeah, no, coach, do you have anything to add on that? Like, I mean, I guess I was like, have you ever thought about doing Ironmans where you're doing the bicycle and running as well?
Yeah. I just suck at swimming. That's the biggest thing there. I mean, I've always like really I enjoy watching Ironmans and triathlons. Like I always, Alistair Brownlee and Gomez, and then now Lionel Sanders and all those guys. Like I've always really enjoyed watching their YouTube content and seeing their training. And honestly, I actually applied a lot of their training to motocross. I think you almost have to train like a triathlete, to be honest, to be good at. I shouldn't say to be good moto, you don't have to do that, but I think that the way triathlons structures the three sports, it allows you to get a little bit more volume, and I think that extra volume helps the moto guy. But yeah, in terms of like wanting to do a triathlon, for sure, maybe one day.
Coach, do you have anything? I find it fascinating because my own selfishness have moved from moto to something a little bit more safer, which is the Ironmans. And I see your times, Alex, and I know that there's a lot of time spent training and running, and so that's
Mhm.
and Coach, didn't you tell me that, like, I always thought that if you were taller you could run faster easier, right? But that has nothing to do with it. You could be 3 feet tall and honestly be more efficient than somebody that's 6 feet tall running.
When it comes to running, what's interesting is your speed always comes from your knee down. People don't realize that. So if you're measuring, and it'd be interesting, Alex, do you know off the top of your head, what is your run cadence? Is it above that 180, 185?
That's a good question, actually. I'd have to pull up the data. It's
Yeah.
not really a number that it's probably maybe a little higher just because I'm shorter, maybe.
And that's
Yeah.
exactly to Alex's point right there is when you look at somebody, it's how quickly does your feet hit the ground? And that's where our speed comes from. So a lot of people think when you're running fast, you want to bring your knees really, really high. It's the exact opposite. You want to drop your knee down. You want your head going right over your kneecap, right into your midfoot placement. And with Alex being as strong as he is, like he said, he's as wide as he is tall. He's able to get that leg turnover going. And therefore, he's running a 2:45 marathon pace. So that's what I've always said. Endurance is still our biggest sport. But when I look at motocross, I still say it is the most difficult sport. And I believe it's the most well-rounded athlete, because if you look at what Alex has proven, right? One of the best in the world on two wheels, and then still can go break a sub 3 hour marathon, but take a sub 3 hour marathoner and go have him try to race Millville 2:30s plus 2, you'd see a completely different athlete. So I've always said that I love watching how motocrossers can cross germinate into other sports and still do well, where you don't see sport specific triathletes, runners, cyclists, gravel bikers. You're always going to have those exceptions, like an Aaron Gwynn, world class downhill mountain biker, actually grew up in moto, and he still credits his ability to read a downhill course because of riding moto. How quickly you go to a new venue, you have to learn the course quickly. Obviously, Jeremy McGrath bringing BMX into moto, but for the most part, you don't see somebody like Alex, one of the best in the motocross world, going over to the triathlon, the endurance world, and not doing well. Jeff Ward, Ricky Johnson, all those guys have shown that they literally train like a triathlete. And it's funny because, like, when I was working with Dunge, a lot of people accused me. They're like, "You're training Dunge like he's training for Ironman." And to me, I just thought it was such a ridiculous comment, because energy systems are energy systems, whether you're riding a motorcycle or you're trying to win Ironman, whether you're trying to win a downhill mountain bike race, or you're trying to, win a horse jumping competition. Energy systems are energy systems. So it is, I love hearing Alex, everything he's saying, because I get in arguments all the time. People think the only way you can go fast is you have to do speed work. And it's the exact opposite. The only way you can ever go fast and sustain it is you have to build an aerobic engine. You have to complement it with physical strength, and then you can go fast. I use this analogy all the time. If we were going to wager a 1 mile race on a motorcycle and you could choose between a 450 and a 65, everybody would choose the 450. And I go, why? And they go, has more power. And I go, well, you just contradicted yourself. Because if it was all about sprint speed, everybody would go for the 65. If it was all about raw power, you'd go to 450. So when you're asking an athlete to get strong and build a big base, and like Alex said, when you build that big base, you build a huge amount of durability at the same time. So now you're resilient to injury, and it's easier to go faster. But like Alex said, it takes a lot of time. And our sport, unfortunately, and I'd love to talk to Alex about this. Johnny, you and I spoke about it. Anybody in the last 2 years who've been thrust into this very, very long season from January to October, are fucked three-way sideways. Because if Alex was an amateur right now and knew that he had to be ready to go race for 39 weekends almost in a row, he could change his training where he's not coming into A1 in peak form, where he only has to maintain it for 17 weeks. He would change the way that he comes in so that he's last man standing and gets better every weekend throughout the year. That's something our sport has not yet seen. And you're going to start to see more of a paradigm shift of that, thanks to people like Alex coaching and using his experience to get people to understand you've got to be good now for almost an entire year at a time. I mean, look at triathlon, look at marathon. You know, you don't hear Alex racing a marathon every Saturday night. Plain and simple.
Well, yeah, and honestly, it brings up a point of like in my moto career for 15 years, we were racing 30 times a year.
Yep.
You're traveling, you're training during the week, and so I just didn't taper much, right? Like in marathon training, you kind of hear these people doing these like 12, 16-week blocks, and then you have a couple week taper in. And I'm just like, from my moto mind is just like, all right, you know, we come back Monday is an easy recovery day, Tuesday's a hard day, Wednesday moderately hard, Thursday easy, fly out Friday, race Saturday. And you just get into this habit of doing that over and over again. And so not that I don't believe in a taper. I think it is good to just have a rest week and let your body absorb that training, right? Because if you're always training hard, you're never allowing your body a chance to absorb what you're throwing at it. But actually, so Rob, it brought up another point of, I've seen in moto a fair amount over the years, like these strength coaches come in, right? And they discount cycling. They, think we're not cyclists or whatever. Like, you don't need to cycle. You don't need to, whatever it is. And I just think like whatever form, there's no one size fits all for training for motocross athletes. Like whatever you want to do, if you want to row, if you want to do the skier, if you want to be a runner, or if you want to cycle, like pick your cardio activity of choice and then just put some time in, and preferably if you could balance upper body and lower body cardio, that allows you to that's kind of like a pro hack, is just to get more volume, right? Because if you're always doing cycling or running, you're not really maybe working on that upper body cardio. But yeah, I just feel like it's a bummer to see some of these strength coaches come in and like just push strength on athletes, because ultimately I do believe that, the stronger your heart and your lungs are, the more they can effectively pump blood to the rest of your body, right? So you want to have a strong heart and lungs. And how do you train that? It's by doing cardio, and how do you get a lot of cardio in the bank? Well, you keep it easy, so you're limiting like the metabolic damage and all that stuff. And so, yeah, I love training. It's fun to talk about it with you guys, and it's cool to see, kind of a motocross type, media outlet talking about this, because I feel like nobody really is talking about it enough. Because I was in the pro ranks for a long time. I trained down at Baker's Factory. I was at, the Star Yamaha guys with Swanee and his crew, and I've trained alongside of a lot of top level athletes for many, many years. And I saw firsthand the amount of training it takes to be at that level. I mean, it's 6-7 days a week for years and years. And even just, like I always thought, like these young kids coming in, I felt kind of bad for them. They won Loretta's, they come in, they're the Horizon Award winner, and they're going into the 250 class. And like at the time, they're racing Zach Osborne and myself. We're 26, 27 years old. We've been doing this training for 10 years, and I felt kind of bad for these kids, because I'm like, you can't replace 10 years of training, unless you're like a natural freak like Jet Lawrence or whatever. It's really, really hard to come in, no matter how fast you are, no matter how good your technique is. You need a high level of fitness if you want to be good for 35 minutes outdoors in the summer.
I couldn't agree with you more. And take it one step further. The crazy part about it is these moto parents are programmed that they have to literally go from winning 6-minute races, as a qualifier, to then winning 3 20-minute motos at Loretta's, and then 2 weekends later go race 2 30s plus 2 outdoors. It's this is where I sound like I'm in my soapbox, but I want to get on every mountaintop that I can scream and say, if you're going to go pro, it is a building process. It's not something that you just continue to, do these little sprint races as qualifiers, go race 3 motos at Loretta's, and now you're prepared to go race pro. It's something that I get so incredibly aggravated with, because nobody, to your point, Alex, is out there sharing their experience. This is why I'm so motivated that someone like yourself has come back and is sharing that knowledge to talk these moto parents off of a shelf, because they think, my athlete's got to be ready by Friday. And I'm like, man, if you're going to try to go another 10 or 15 years as a pro, like Alex has done, you can't burn all those matches up before you get there. And so it's a catch-22, and these parents are stuck in a real quandary.
Yeah.
Alex, I wanted to ask, because now that you've made the transition into something that's incredibly difficult, but a little bit safer, running marathons, for somebody that's watching this that has aspirations of becoming pro, is running a pretty good factor if you can't just go do 5 days on the bike? Like, if, let's just say you're a weekend warrior and you can only ride Saturday and Sunday, how do you get something comparable to the dirt bike to help with your fitness? Would it be running? Would it be the cycling? Would it be rowing? I mean, now you've done 70 to 80 miles in a week, which is crazy. And yet you've just said on this show that you're training less than what you did when you were a professional, which that's mind boggling. If you put it into perspective.
Yeah, no, there's a couple ways to answer that, I guess. Like kind of like I said earlier, really, you don't have to be a runner. You don't have to be a cyclist. It kind of and also depends on where you live, your geography. Like, let's say, for example, if you live next to a lake, dude, you could get really fit and put in a lot of time on a kayak, or rowing, for example. I mean, rowers have very high level fitness, right? But cycling seems to be kind of the big thing for a lot of people, just because it's fun, and it's low impact on the knees and the ankles, and you can put in a lot of time without really getting too beat up. Running, you have to really work into it and be easy. Like I said, even for me, like in my career, it took me a good year to build up to like a 70-mile week. It took a lot of time to build my body up to that. And I remember like doing, in that kind of first winter after I retired, I went up to, my longest long run was maybe 20 miles, and I was wrecked for like 4 or 5 days afterwards. Whereas now, like, when I did this Mesa, Arizona marathon 2 weeks ago now, I was like pretty good after about 3, 4 days. I will say, like, it's probably the fastest I've recovered from a marathon. Like for me, my quads kind of get pretty beat up. But like, yeah, so there's definitely no one size fits all. You can do whatever you want in terms of training to be super fit, on the dirt bike. And what was your other question there, Johnny?
Fuck. I was asking what was comparable to riding, and then shit.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I kind of went off on a rabbit hole there, but
Yeah, no. That was basically it. I guess it was the loaded was you're training less now doing 80-mile
yeah.
weeks versus than on the bike. Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand how, like, 80 miles already sounds like something that's going to burn you out, because that's 2-3 hours a day, kind of 7 days a week as far as volume goes. But you're saying you were doing that more on a dirt bike. And it's like, did you ever show up to the race and be worn out, not be your best self?
Oh, for sure. I do think that for every athlete, you have to find your ceiling. You have to find what you can or can't handle. And for me, in my career, it was when we trained with Osho. That was gnarly. Like what my brother and I did, a lot of 2 hour bike rides, not maybe not enough zone two. We were hammering 40-minute motos on the dirt bike. Like we did a lot. But I feel like in 2015, I was on the Cycle Trader team that year. I got my first win outdoors as a privateer, got a couple podiums in Supercross, a couple podiums outdoors, and it landed me that factory Iowa Star Yamaha. But I remember points in that summer of 2015, Jeremy and he was going for the title, and I was just trying to get that factory ride where we were training so much. I remember being like, I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I can sustain this. But I think that set the tone and the precedent for the rest of my career as to mentally what I could handle. So yeah, that was really an eye-opening experience for me there, and I think it set the tone for the rest of my career. But then, so when I retired, I didn't want to like spend a lot of time training, right? Because I just went so hard for so long in my racing career, and I looked at like, all right, I could cycle a lot. I can maybe go after these cycling races, mountain bike, whatever. But honestly, I love running, and I think from a time perspective, with a dad with 2 kids, and I'm working 2 jobs with Spring Creek and troll training, I wanted to do something where it wasn't a huge time commitment. And for me, like an hour a day, you can get a lot of bang for your buck for running an hour a day, and you may look at like an 80-mile week, but if you start to like add an hour in the morning, or maybe a couple times, like I'll do a long run on Saturday and I can put in about 16 to 18 miles. And you start to do double runs, maybe an hour in the morning, 45 to an hour at night, and you can actually get to 70, 80 miles in a week relatively easy. I understand that's not easy, but from a time perspective of, where I was training 3 times a day and doing a morning workout, riding the dirt bike for 2, 3 hours, and then going into the gym afterwards, or doing 2-hour bike rides after riding. For me, just a once a day workout, like, actually seems super easy. So I guess that's kind of my thought process on it all. But ultimately, it stemmed from just being retired and having kids and not wanting to have a huge time suck.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Cause like the bicycle, a lot of the races as far as endurance, they're 4 to plus or more hours, right? So you have to be comparable on the bicycle for that. I mean, coach, we've talked about it with even the half Ironmans. I'll be on the bicycle with your stuff too, and it's like 90 minutes is kind of the minimum, and then 2.5 hours, that's a huge time suck. But I want to get to some of the actual moto racing that happened last time. But last little question, Alex, when you're on the treadmill, do you run on an incline no matter what, or no?
No, maybe I should. I don't know. I don't. I just put it on 0 and go. I need all the leg speed turnover I can get. So I don't. No, I just kind of set it. And so actually the other thing too is, for this Mesa build, I probably did 90% of my training on the treadmill. And a lot of that is just due to, it's nice to be able to like wake up in the morning, just go down there, throw some shorts on, put on a YouTube video, and just run, kind of mindless. And the other part of it is, I live in Minnesota, and we've had some spells where it's, like, I think it's 11 below out right now. It's just so cold. And I will say, like, for the most part, I like running outside. Once it gets down around 10 degrees, it's kind of starting to get pretty miserable. And I think if it's below 0, it's probably not good for your lungs to be outside training. But yeah, the treadmill is just nice because it's just, you can get on there, it's consistent, you know what to expect, you set the pace, and you just kind of go. And the other part of it too is, like, dude, I would actually sweat quite a bit. So I feel like I kind of got some heat training in going into Mesa, which was kind of handy too, because I found myself, like, having to, like, actually do electrolytes and carb up in the interval sessions, just to make sure I was not totally drained after that. Cause I'd lose like 3-4 pounds if I wasn't careful.
Yeah, Arizona, that place sucks because it's just limbo. It's just hot and dry constantly. But honestly, right around now, that was the perfect time to go for a marathon, is because it was probably 60
Oh,
degrees or
beautiful.
so, you know.
Yeah, I think it was like 50 degrees at the start. It was perfect marathon temperatures.
Yeah. Okay. And coach, I guess I want the little rebuttal on the treadmill running. From what I have heard, is it's 0.5 to like 1.5% is kind of equivalent to running outside if you're trying to go pace to pace, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. The consensus is at least 1% grade on the treadmill, and mainly because what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift the engagement of certain muscle groups. So literally from your tips of your toes all the way through the arch of your feet, up your calf, front and back of your shins, all the way into the front and back of your quads and hamstrings. Just having that 1 degree is going to give you the essential biomechanics of running outdoors. Now, again, I live in flat Florida. This morning, right now, I think, like yesterday, it was 97 degrees on February, whatever it is, 15th, right? So it's crazy to me when Alex is talking about racing at, running at 10 degrees or even close to 0. I mean, literally, I can't imagine going out when it's below 50 degrees. Your lungs hurt because, like Alex was saying, the bronchi, those little, if you look in the inside of lungs, it looks like a set of coral in the water, and you've got those little fingers that grab, fish and stuff out of the water. That's what the inside of your lungs look like. So when you vasodilate the lungs in that cold temperature, you can literally freeze the alveoli in the lungs. And like Alex said, it's extremely dangerous. This is why in the Tour de France, when they have big climbs, they stuff newspaper down the front of their shirt. So when they dive bomb, the lungs have all opened up. You don't want that ice cold air when they dive bomb to freeze the inside of the lungs. That's why they create a barrier between them. That's why they always put the newspaper in between their jersey and their chest. So yeah, there's a lot of danger to being in the cold. And as much as we joke, I mean, I'm not kidding. It was literally 97 degrees on Saturday here in Orlando, and it's the middle of February. So we run in the treadmill because unfortunately, all you end up doing is trying to not die of a heat stroke. Alex, you remember when you were at Baker's factory? I mean, it's 7 o'clock in the morning and it's already 90 degrees and 100% humidity, especially by the lake there. So
Yeah.
it's a completely different type of training. And one of the reasons why we like to change it up with the rower, running, swimming, cycling is just to break the mental monotony up. You know, like with where Alex is at, there's certain times in the year where treadmill is your only option, or training indoors at some capacity, whether it's on a Wahoo kicker like you've got, Johnny, or whether it's on a treadmill. We're just trying to keep the motivation up. So when you've got good weather outside, trade outside so that when you have to go inside, we avoid the dreaded cabin fever.
Well, that brings up a good point, Rob. Of From my experience of living and training in Florida for 5 years, you have to really be strategic in how you train there. Actually,
Mhm.
like it's so hot. Like, so obviously you're riding the dirt bike outside, so that's your outdoor. You're going to be exposed to 90, 95, 100 degrees. You're sweating. I mean, I would lose like 6 to 8 pounds on a typical day, like warm up and 235s, like training at Moto Sandbox.
Yeah.
And so I got to the point where I'd come home, I'd do my like afternoon like gym session or cardio like inside in AC with a fan blowing on me, trying to cool my core body temperature down, but still get that training effect. Because if you're training outside for your morning warm up on the dirt bike and then again in the afternoon, it's just a lot of heat stress. And it was kind of, I feel like it kind of became a thing in, let's say, 2020, 2019, when a lot of us were racing at the WW Ranch National. And you saw like the California boys actually do really well at WW, and all the people that had been training in Florida kind of like were not doing that well. And simply not because they weren't fit, it's just because they've already been doing so much heat stress and so much exposure that they were just more tired, in my personal opinion.
No,
And so
you're exactly
yeah.
right. Remember, Sexton went one DNF, to your point exactly.
Hmm.
And that's when he was training here in Florida. And it just shows you what heat exhaustion will do. It's not heat stroke, but chronic heat exhaustion is just something that's almost nearly impossible to be able to dig out from underneath day after day after day after day after day. And I'm so glad that you're saying that, because when I say it, people think, well, my young son or daughter needs to toughen up. They start the name calling, where you've been there, bought the t-shirt. And like you said, in your own observations, you can't come in here and just
Hmm.
get smoked. You can't spend 6 to 8 hours a day in the heat and then expect to race well on the weekend. So
Yeah,
hopefully a
no,
lot
it's
of
just,
parents listen to what you said.
yeah, I mean, it's just basic physiology, right? And like that's why I think it's cool to just pay attention to like marathon and Tour de France cycling and triathlon. You see other sports, like these sports have doctors and scientists studying the athletes, and like nobody's down in Florida or like in the Bahamas training, right? They're up in the mountains. They're getting that altitude training. They're staying in cool weather. That's why I personally like, honestly, I think Minnesota training in the summertime is great because you can still get the volume and the intensity, but you're not getting totally zapped by that heat and humidity. I feel like in motocross, there's just been this trend, just like want to go south, which is, in the wintertime, obviously you need to go south. But I think for those people that like have maybe a home base up in the northern climates, like, dude, take advantage of living up north in the summertime because you can get the training. And I personally believe like the quality of it's better just because you're not so zapped from the heat.
Yeah, I think Tomac is a good example of, he's never gotten out of that Colorado environment. You know, whether you want to tease him about the train high, race low, he's doing it. You've got relatively cool conditions, he's doing that. You know, it's just on and on the list goes.
Yeah.
So
Well, so one cool thing about Tomac is my brother trained there and obviously he's very private, very secret. But
yeah,
when my brother was training there for 2 years with Eli, they would actually on Mondays, quite often they'd go up to like 10,000 feet and go cross country skiing.
yeah.
Um, I don't feel like anybody's ever talked about that. And the fact that Tomac's up at 10,000 feet, probably in 30-degree weather, cross country skiing after a supercross or a motocross race. I mean, to me, that's badass. And it just
Yep.
shows you, but also, like, Eldon's guys are down in Florida on a Monday doing an hour, hour and a half bike ride in 90-degree heat, and then you have Tomac cross country skiing at 10,000 feet. So that just goes to show you there is no one size fits all program for motocross.
But it also does validate, look at the longevity of Tomac and look at the people who've been burnt out through Baker's factory. You pretty much can't
Mhm.
argue with the results, you know?
Right. Yeah, there is. that's the topic for another day.
Yeah, but to your point exactly. I mean, you're probably one of the toughest individuals I've ever met, having the privilege of working with you and Germ both. When you say that the heat and humidity stacks up on you, that says a lot, because you're not somebody
Mhm.
that's ever shied away from the work ethic. You've never been somebody who's been afraid to put in the hard work. And then for you to acknowledge, hey, look, there's that a point of diminishing returns where you can only train in the heat so long before it becomes counterproductive. And you're even doing it
Mhm.
yourself, where you'd ride
Yeah.
in the heat and then go cross train in cooler environments.
All right, because I
Mhm.
have you guys two here that know so much about physiology and your experience with training, I do want to say something that I have read some studies at some of the new like Tour de France cycling teams. They've been doing a lot of heat training actually, because it's hard to get to. So the consensus is if you can't train hot, you got to get high. Is what I've heard, right? So I want your guys' opinion on this. And so if you wanted to increase your VO2 max, you'd have to train at altitude for 4 to 8 weeks or so, right? But there's been studies done that you could get equivalent to the VO2 max buffer by being almost in like a sauna, but not training super hard, trying to stay in like that low zone 2, but for a couple hours a day for 3 or 4 weeks, you will get just as much of a VO2 max bump as you would training at altitude. And so I've been seeing a lot of teams come out and saying that they're now implementing heat training, which is interesting. But they also have to make sure that they stay hydrated, because as soon as you start sweating too much or anything like it's harder to recover.
Yeah.
Any
I
any
don't know if
any
you
do you
want
guys think that's total bullshit or
to. Well, I was gonna say, yeah, I don't know if you wanna. I could talk a little bit on this, Rob, and you can share your input. Um, so when you say heat training, you have to define what that is. Are we talking a 20, 30 minute sauna session after at the end of the day, or are we talking about going to a hot climate and like our whole base build is built around like heat training? I would have to say, oh, you
so
go,
so
Johnny.
I'll interject. So what I have heard has been like, yeah, literally training in a sauna where you're at 100 degrees or so. And if you can't do that, I've heard just start bundling up, where you're running on the
Mhm.
treadmill or on your bicycle, where you're just wearing a jacket and a bunch of sweaters and so on and so forth. And over time, your heart rate will be lower at the temperature, right, with the same amount of wattage put out or effort. But now go for it, Alex.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just you have to look at the real world practicality of that. A lot of these Tour de France teams, right? You're talking about 20, 30, maybe 40 riders. I don't think there's a sauna big enough to fit that many people into, right? So, I mean, I think it is realistic. I've seen, top level marathon runners like Clayton Young and Connor Mance, some of the top level marathon runners in the US right now. They're doing sauna. 20, 30 minutes maybe after a full day of training is kind of like a small little addition to their overall training. But in a lot of you also look at these like European Tour de France teams, like they're doing altitude camps over in the Alps or maybe in Spain, or like Tenerife, I think is an island where a lot of people go and train. So I don't know if it's necessarily realistic, or I'd have to see what you're talking about in terms of like these people actually doing heat training, because I think that's a very small piece of the puzzle, because you're talking about people that are doing 30, 35 hours a week, and they're doing 5, 6, 7 hour days on the bicycle, and they're eating a lot of carbs. I think honestly, that's another topic that we could get into is I think, yeah, heat training is great or whatever, but I think the revolution right now in cycling, especially, is carbs. Yeah, and Rob, you've probably seen a lot of stuff on this. I mean, athletes are going from 30 to 50 grams an hour to 150 to 180 grams of carbs an hour, and cyclists are having, they used to have a couple eggs and go bike 5, 6 hours on 2 bottles of water, and now they're having rice and eggs and going out and just having 100 to 150 grams of carbs an hour on the bicycle. So yeah, I think heat training is great, and it has an application, and there's obviously a ton of benefits and science behind it. But yeah, Rob, I'd like to hear your take on this.
Well, what scares me the most is whenever you read these big scientific studies and they use an exclusive athlete like a marathoner or a group of runners like the Kenyans, or they take a Tour de France team, you've got to remember the point of what Alex just said is their whole job is wake up, train, race, eat, repeat, sleep, repeat, do over. If you look at the amount of stress, not because Alex is on the show with us today, but you look at all the different factors that Alex has to address on a daily basis. He's got 2 little ones. He's got a wife. He's got his own training. He's got several companies. He's running the track, right? There's a lot of stress before 10 in the morning that most pros don't even know about. And that's because they get paid to do nothing but eat, sleep, train, repeat. So whenever I see a scientific study where they're like, oh, we've got to do HAIT training, I'm looking at the amount of stress on the individual that's going into that environment. And for 99.99% of the rest of us, it's completely irrelevant. Exactly what Alex said. It's the relativity of training the way a pro cycling team trains or an elite runner trains is comparing apples and zebras. Because like Johnny, you just mentioned the idea that they're talking about layering on clothes. Well, if I take your motorcycle and I put 7 inches of mud on it, nobody's surprised that the motor loses power. Why? Well, because heat robs the motor of power. Well, if you look at that principle of physics associated with something mechanical, and you apply the same thing to the human body, when you start layering the body up to supposedly get it heat acclimatized, all you're doing is inducing heat stroke. Because if the exothermic process cannot remove the heat from inside the body literally cooks from the inside out. There's no adaptation to that. So that's where I have a little bit of a problem. It's kind of like intermittent fasting. If the 3 of us got dropped onto an island and we were stranded for a month, sure, the body's going to go into ketosis and it'll survive. But putting your body under that kind of stress and then asking it to perform at an optimal level, I do find it interesting what Alex just said. There's this there's this huge epiphany now. Lots of carbs. Go up to 100, 150 grams of carbs, where 3 years ago it was no carbs, carbs are the evil. Well, if you push all of the propaganda aside, the body, particularly the brain, relies on sugar. So when the body's not getting sugar, it cannibalizes muscle to create sugar. Well, that's unhealthy. That's counterproductive. Then on the other side of it, isn't it interesting? Look at running shoes. Go back 10 years ago, everybody was running barefoot and they wanted a 0 drop from the front to the back of the heel. And then in the last 5 years, every shoe manufacturer's got 4 inches of cushion and it's a 0 drop from front to back. Now they're going the other direction. And this is the problem that I have with all these different, so-called research studies. It's like, how can 5 years ago cushioning was no longer good? Now cushioning is back. How could intermittent fasting be so good, but now multiple carbs, an abundance of carbs is back? I always just say, always apply any question that you have about the human body, always apply it to mechanical. If you put a motorcycle that's got 100 hours on it on the Millville track, none of us would be surprised that it grenades, right? It's already, if you dyno a bike that has 100 hours, what's the dyno report tell you? The bike's tired. Well, no shit, Sherlock, it has 100 hours on it. So if Alex has an athlete that wakes up and his heart rate's up 12 beats, he's got a bad sleep score, his HRV's out of balance. And of course, Alex is not going to say, hey, you know what? Today is a great day to do 5 by 1 mile at anaerobic threshold pace. Why? Because the biofeedback indicators indicate that the athlete's not ready to take on that stress. So now you come back full circle. When you're looking at doing these so-called heat stress tests, I understand the physiological adaptation, but the thing that I want the listeners to really pay attention to is they're making sure that athlete and that team of athletes, when they do that type of work, they're as fresh as they could possibly be. They're certainly not doing that on a Sunday after putting in 400 miles, 500 miles on the bike. That I can guarantee you. So that's where, Johnny, I get a little concerned when the average, anyone on the public reads a report. They're dealing with the job, a family, all their other things.
Yeah,
and now they're going to go do that.
Stressors on there.
No, thank you. And unfortunately, and I hate to say this because it disgusts me every time when our phone rings anywhere between 100 and 150 times a week, and someone says they got smoked at a CrossFit gym because the local trainer told them to go intermittent fasting and do nothing but CrossFit, and they're 21, 22 years old and they can't get an erection. They're craving simple sugars like a meth addict. They're tired and they can't go to sleep and they have night sweats and they're 22, 23 years old. Come on, man. What the hell were you thinking? Well, you weren't. That's what frustrates me.
I
So
actually had
that's
a guy last week, Rob, that
y-
he's like, hey, he's at a CrossFit gym, and he's like his trainer. I'm coaching him for a half marathon plan, right? And he's
yeah.
like, the trainer guy at the gym told me to eat almonds, like eat almonds during his run. And I'm like,
Oh,
don't eat almonds. Stop eating almonds. I'm like, protein, fat, like fiber, like what are you doing, dude? Put the
no.
almonds away. Eat those when you're done running.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
So it's
Well,
crazy. Like yeah, you got to be careful the stuff you hear these days.
well, I've shared this with Johnny before. My wife is 5 foot tall, and we were doing a motocross performance camp and out there in Fair Oaks. And we were out there and we went to a local gym, and everywhere around the gym, it had an 8.5 by 11 that said, drink a gallon of water to everybody in the gym. Well, if my wife drinks a gallon of water, she's going to die of hyponatremia. It's just plain and simple. It's
Mm-hmm.
a very, very simple mathematical equation, right? So that's what disgusts me. Eat an almond on the run, you might as well just have a sub sandwich from Jersey Mike's. You know what I mean? It's like
Mm-hmm.
the inverse relationship between heart rate and food complexity is so simple. And to your point,
Mm-hmm.
Alex, just look at the endurance market. Blocks,
Yeah.
liquid fluid. That's it. Easily
Yeah.
digestible because you're going to be sitting there with that heart rate so elevated. Come on.
Hmm.
So
No,
what you
it's
don't
it's
know
kind of
could hurt you.
become more apparent to me, and John, you can hop in here if you want, but it really depends on what you're doing every day. Like I can't even give you a diet plan that's the same 7 days a week, and I think if you're getting a diet plan that's the same 7 days a week, that should be a red flag because let's say Monday, Tuesday, you're doing some zone two low intensity stuff, and then Wednesday you have your interval session. Well, how you eat Wednesday to fuel and get the most out of that interval session is drastically different than what you would do on Monday with your zone two, and there's a time and a place, and I do feel like an endurance athlete's diet is not necessarily a healthy diet. But
Mhm.
if your goal is to be like a fast 5K runner, 10K runner, half marathon, or do a fast half Ironman, let's say, you have to fuel appropriately, and that basically means like staying away from protein, fat, and fiber before and during the session, right? And then filling up with protein and all that stuff afterwards. But it's really like the timing is really crucial. And obviously you don't want to be out there 10 miles into a run and like having some stomach issues. Nobody wants that too, right? So yeah, there's
Oh,
definitely
that's awful. It's awful.
yeah.
Shit in
No,
your pants is awful too.
no,
Because
we
you got too many calories.
we had a factory Kawasaki rider who went out to the pro circuit track, Alex, and he was using our energy fuel, and we don't have anything artificial in it, and he forgot his energy fuel, and he got to the test track, and on the way to the track, he went through 7-Eleven and picked up a mainstream bottled an RTD, a ready to drink, and the artificial color in the RTD vasodilated his sphincter, and he was shitting his pants when he went through the whoops.
Yeah.
I mean, it
We
just
don't
goes
need
to show
that.
no, but it goes to your point exactly is you've got to know what works and then not deviate from it because unfortunately in that case he called me from the portalet and he's like, what do I do? And I'm like, what
Mhm.
happened? I was thinking it was our energy fuel, which we've never had anybody complain of GI distress. So of course I'm nervous because I'm thinking, what happened? Did he get a bad batch? Was the carbohydrate concentration not right? He's like, well, I forgot my energy fuel. So I went through 7-Eleven and grabbed a couple ready to drink bottles. And I'm like, oh, I go, let me guess.
Mhm.
Is it bright in color? He's like, oh yeah. I've got to have the vibrant, I said, those colors are not natural. And if you read the
Mhm.
ingredients, those coloring agents are like poison in your system. And it just literally blew his bottom out
Yeah.
just completely. So
So, Coach, after working with you, the biggest thing that I noticed, especially since the 3 Ironmans that I've done, was realizing how much the body needs calories to fuel. Because like the few GNCCs that I've done, they're 2-3 hours. I never ate anything.
mhm.
And now finding out that like, oh crap, you could have performed so much better if you were just fueling properly. And Alex, I'm sure you can attest to this too. Like, if you don't have a gel every 3 or 4 hours in your marathon, you're just going to start to like flatline, where when you have those calories, all of a sudden you just can, it's not like all of a sudden you hit this magic button, but it's just like you can continue to sustain the effort that you're given, if as long as you're
Mhm.
fueling properly.
So that's kind of you're touching on something, Johnny, that Rob's probably really familiar with, and I'm becoming more familiar with on the daily. Is like, well, you have an athlete that comes to us. and they've never fueled properly. And like it's such an easy gain. You just have them start fueling properly. I mean, that is like single-handedly the easiest kind of like low-hanging fruit, if you will, is to just have someone go from fasting, get to an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours to actually fueling with food. It makes a big, big difference. And yeah, you just simply can't ask yourself to go without fuel on a training run or in a race, for example. I think I want to say like I saw a study the other day that it's like in a marathon, like every hour you're burning 180 grams of carbs, right? So if even if you're putting in 90 grams an hour on the run, which is actually a lot, it's hard to like stomach that much. You have to train your stomach to handle 90 grams an hour. You're still at a 50% deficit, right? And so you wonder why people like in the marathon specifically hit the wall at mile 20, 21. Like your body's just running out of glycogen. It's just that simple, So yeah, fuel for the win.
Well, put it in perspective, Johnny. We work with Mike Witowski, Phoenix Honda GNCC. 3-hour GNCC, he'll burn between 31 and 3,500 calories in one race.
Yeah, crazy. That's
Just to
that's
put
a
it in
challenge
perspective.
right there.
Yeah. Well, and to like what Alex is saying, the most the body can normally assimilate is about 300 to 350 calories an hour. So if you take Alex's numbers and divide that by 4, that's how he's getting the 90 grams per hour, right? And like what was mentioned earlier, now you have these teams that are trying to push that to 100, 120 grams. And it's a Molotov cocktail. It's either going to work really well or it's going to work really bad. And when it works bad, it's a cleanup on aisle 3 that's not very enjoyable. That's for sure. But that's the thing that's so crazy. Like what Alex was saying, if you know how to properly eat before you prehydrate the body, you've got about 60 to 70 minutes of consistent energy. The liver is going to feed the brain. Your muscles obviously have their own gas tank. But once those energy levels start to drop, those gas tanks start to drop, then performance is negatively impacted. But if the heart rate's elevated, the body's number one concern is always not dying of a heat stroke. So it suppresses and shuts down digestion. That's what makes what Alex does running a sub 3-hour marathon so impressive is the heart rate is elevated. You need calories after an hour, but you still have another hour and 20, hour and 40 minutes to go. And that's where training becomes, I think, I like what Alex said. I enjoy training because there's so much to learn. Racing is actually kind of easy. I think training's the harder part because racing is you're fresh, you're tapered, everything is, you're good to go. And you've already figured out all the bad stuff. How fast can I go and still feed it? And when I feed it, not have any kind of GI distress to negatively impact pacing. And there's your PR. Especially
is that cardio cough, Alex?
Yeah, I got a little bit sick last week.
But it's crazy that you were still running 8 miles this morning. So we absolutely didn't talk one tidbit about the race, which is totally effing cool. I don't
Whatever.
this has been interesting for me, because fitness is huge and there's not enough information out there. So, and I said we were going to stay around an hour. So Alex, I want to ask you 2 more things. We had a comment come over saying, what do you think about taking pre-workout? And coach, you could answer that as well. And then I'm going to try not to forget the second part of the question, Alex. So is recovery wise, do you wear a fitness watch and do you look at your HRV, your sleep history, the body battery, if anything, or your resting heart rate, to know, hey, I could go push hard? Because these silly things, sometimes they say, hey, you're fully good, like go push hard, right? So first, the pre-workout deal, if you think that's an adequate amount to fuel the body before racing or running or anything cardio.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you answer any of those comments. I've seen a few of them. Somebody was asking earlier about if Spring Creek's got any track changes, and no track changes as of yet. But yeah, so the pre-workout stuff, I think it's great. I think it has a place. You're throwing B12 at yourself and caffeine and whatever guarana. You're getting yourself hyped up. Sweet. I do think caffeine is one of the most heavily studied molecules on the planet for performance, and there is a performance benefit to caffeine. It actually does like blunt the pain receptors or whatever in your body, so you can handle more pain, push yourself harder. But having said that, honestly, carbs and sugar, those are the things that are going to make or break your race. So yeah, you can throw some caffeine and some B12 at you, but like make sure that has carbs on board, and make sure you're fueling with carbs every 15 to 30 minutes. And also make sure you're training your gut to be able to handle those carbs, so you don't have disaster pants mid race. But yeah, I mean, Rob knows this well and Johnny, I'm sure if you've done you said three Ironmans, Johnny, that's
Half, right? So I guess that's
half.
equivalent to like 1.5,
Yeah,
but
I mean, but dude, that's something, and you don't do that level of training and do those races without coming to understand
totally
the human
panicked in the
body and
water, right?
fueling. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um,
So yeah, pre-workout is great, but just make sure you get your carbs with it.
and then recovery wise, because you just basically finished a marathon, and I know after I do some Ironmans, coach, I talked to you and I was like, hey, I'm gonna go race this half marathon Spartan race, and that was a disaster. My body was not ready to go do that at all. So how is it that you determined whether or not you're recovered enough, right? Is there any data acquisitions that you use to help with that? Because like in the marathon or even a big old long race, if you're a moto guy, your heart rate's at 180, 200 for the weekend, how are you judging that you're recovering? What are the analytics that you use, Alex?
Yeah, so I've had an Oura ring probably for like 4 years now. I got it like a couple years before I retired, and then honestly, I can't believe this thing. It's the same ring I've had for like 4 years. I don't know how it's still lasting, to be honest. Like it was black and now it's kind of like all gray. But yeah, so I really pay attention to my HRV. I think that's a really important metric to look at, and I think that also is looking into it's kind of a snapshot or a window into just your overall program, right? Your life stress, your training stress. If you're sick, I've noticed things like if I have alcohol, um, certain times of the year, you're craving that golden light. I like to make golden, but I definitely know every time I have that or a glass of wine, like my resting heart rate's 3 to 5 beats higher. My body temperature is higher. Some of the Yeah, it's really interesting looking at the HRV. So the highest I've ever seen my HRV, interestingly, was after it always comes after I've had like a really good race, like when I got my first 450 top 10 in New Jersey at Foxborough. The next day I had my highest HRV, which I found was really interesting. I had a high HRV like after this 245 marathon in Mesa. And then also and the flip side, when I've been under, let's say like my 280-mile weeks, when I had a lot of fatigue in the legs, my HRV was pretty low. So that for me, HRV is a really interesting, and I feel like there's more and more studies coming out how that kind of correlates to your training and your overall vibe, I guess. And then resting heart rate, obviously, like we tell our athletes, if your resting heart rate's 5 to 7 beats or more higher, like you really need to take a look, maybe reanalyze the day's activities, because like Rob was saying earlier, you really need to pay attention to those metrics. And but at the same time, I will say this is interesting too. So in 2019, I was training a lot with Adam and Kenny at Sandbox, and they both had the Whoop, and they got to the point where like they would not on race day, they would not look at their Whoop metrics. And I was the same way with my Oura ring. I would not look at my metrics because like, let's say you wake up in the morning on Saturday and you're going to Redbud and you're expected to perform, and your Whoop or your Oura ring tells you like, oh, you're under recovered, take the day off. Then that's in your head all day long. Those metrics of like telling you like, oh man, I'm not at my best. It's telling me to take the day off and I'm expected to race. So you got to take those with a grain of salt, like use them as a guide, but don't just live and die by those metrics. Because ultimately they're not always accurate. I feel like a lot of that stuff is based off of algorithms. I know one time, for example, when I was training in Claremont and I was at the gym, like, so the Nike track crew, whatever, was like Noah Lyles and stuff. They would train at the NTC Center, and there was like a cold front that came through, and it affected everybody's readiness scores, and everybody's readiness scores were like off that week because of this cold front. And I'm like, well, so to me, that tells me that, yeah, you definitely don't want to live and die by these metrics, but I do think they are useful.
And Johnny,
Uh,
this goes back to what we were talking about. The tail of the snake always follows the head. So, like when Alex has had a big week, you'll notice that next day it starts to bottom out. And when he's had one of those peak performances, the tail follows it right to the peak. And I love to hear that because it validates that the tail of the snake always follows the head, always.
Yeah, I always figured like with my HRV, it always seemed to me like a delayed indicator,
Yeah, it's a
you
heart
know,
rate
where
lag. It's a heart rate lag is what we refer to it as.
yeah.
Yep.
So like
Mm.
from what we've talked, coach, is the best thing that I look at is what Alex talked about was my resting heart rate. If I
Mhm.
wake up and if I'm at 43, I'm like, okay, cool. I can push hard today. If I wake up and I'm at 49, I'm like, okay, maybe it's a zone 2 longer deal. But okay, last question, Alex. What you know now with troll training and running the marathons, would it have made you a better athlete 5-ish years ago or even 10 years ago when you were in your prime motocross years? You know, would
Mm.
it have helped?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I was looking at the comments too, and you're definitely gonna have to change the title on this, Johnny.
Yeah, no, we
um,
didn't talk shit
yeah, yeah,
about bikes,
yeah.
but I don't
Sorry,
care.
Max
This is
Anstie.
been
I'm
interesting
pretty
for
bummed
me.
for Max Anstie on the restart, but yeah, damn it. Um,
There we go.
but yeah, no. So to be honest, I thought about that because I feel like my cardio, my aerobic fitness is really, really high right now. But would I change anything? No, because the reality of motocross is like just trying to stay injury free is the hardest thing. And I trained at a very high level. I mean, I logged 20-hour weeks, 24-hour weeks. I did a lot of volume. I would go do my motos at Sandbox, 235s, 240s, come back to a 2-hour bike ride. I did a lot of volume and did a lot of training. And there was times in my career where like I was really, really fit, and I don't think I could have gotten any fitter. Um, and so I don't really have any regrets in that way. And especially too, if you look at my career, I spent 6 or 7 years as a privateer grinding, not making much of a salary, 35K a year. Finally broke through in 2015 and got a factory ride and was able to make good money, tap into bonuses, get podiums and wins. So I really feel like I kind of did it the hard way. And I don't know if I would have changed anything because I was really always following the science, and I feel like my training was pretty on point. And I got to see like what Tomac did and Baker's Factory and the Star Yamaha guys. And so I look at my training now with marathons, and I think it's just simply a fact of being healthy and injury free for 3 years and being able to build and build and build. And I'm excited with this marathon stuff. I'd like to see, maybe 230, sub 240s in the cards one day. We're just going to keep building and see what we can do with in the dad stage.
It's awesome. I
Dude.
love it.
Well, I'm excited to see it because I'm 34. We're about the same age here, and I see some of your, your analytics, and I'm just like, fuck this guy, fuck this guy,
Sorry,
So,
Johnny. Yeah.
yeah, wants me to like start get back to a needle, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Well, anyway, hey, I appreciate everybody that has joined us on this very large tangent on fitness, but I kind of felt like this might have gone this way once I asked you to be on here, Alex, because generally I just wanted to pick your brain
Mhm.
about, some certain fitness topics. And I really appreciate the content that you've been given out, especially some of the ones where you're asking the riders, hey, what's your fastest mile? Hey, what's your bench press? Hey, what's your max squat? Hey, what's this? And a lot of the guys are like, I don't effing know, but then there's a couple of the big standouts where they're like, oh yeah, I know all this stuff. And it's like, okay, there's a missing
Mhm.
piece of the puzzle there. Some people
Yeah.
should know this information.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. We really need like an hour to talk about and another hour to talk about racing, right?
yeah, we really do. But you're more than welcome to come back on the show, dude. Again, highly respect you and life after racing because I'm glad you found something that like puts you back into that zone because I always felt like racing motorcycles was a self-induced meditation where you forget about the rest of the world, and it was very hard to learn, at least in my experience after racing. I was never as good as you, right? I was always getting lapped by guys of your caliber, so after racing, needed to find something that
Mhm.
still kind of got you in that zone as far as meditation goes. That's
Mhm.
that's what I've learned. And the body is not designed to not do anything. You need to move. But I am digressing a bunch. Is there anything you want to say as far as like if somebody wants to go get involved with running or training or the moto stuff, what you're doing at Troll Training, you know, I'm sure guys would love to hear it.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously that's kind of my passion, right? Is been a high level dirt bike racer for most of my life. Started riding, I think, when I was like 4. You know, started racing pro in 2008, and you know, I've always been passionate about health and fitness. You know, I remember Rob training Jeremy and I back in the day. You know, and that actually, yeah, that you know, Rob really kickstarted just my love for health and fitness. Honestly, way back in the day when we went and visited him in Florida, kind of that was like the light bulb moment, like, oh, you know, this is kind of interesting, you know, this training in the human body. And you know, now I have Troll Training and my own training platform, and it's just been a pleasure to there's so many people in this world, and it's been a pleasure with the people that we do have a part of Troll Training, and just you know, handing down my knowledge and wisdom that I've acquired. And you know, we're constantly learning, and I think the key is following the science as well as my trial and error for my racing career. And just there's so much misinformation out there, you know, like prime example, Johnny talking about like heat training or like under fueling, intermittent fasting, like Rob was talking about. And, you know, I think for us, we can just help you cut through the guesswork, right? I mean, that's what Rob and I, our job is basically just cut through the guesswork, you know, the trial and error we've in our knowledge, just kind of help expedite your guys's goals, you know, help you achieve your goals faster. So yeah, appreciate you guys. It was a pleasure and an honor to be on here and talk about all things training. And sorry we didn't talk about Anstey and the red star, or yeah, red flag or Sexton. But there's a lot that we talked about that was good stuff here.
Absolutely.
100%. That's why this is live. You know, it's not any pre-recorded bullshit. We're just coming to you real, right? So anyway, Alex, I appreciate you. And, you know, Coach Rob, his stuff's always in the description for stuff. And, you know, he's my co-host. He'll be back here next week. So, yeah, appreciate all you guys. Enjoy the week. All right.